And we are back. What's up, everyone? I'm Nick, and this is Swiftful Thinking. Now, in this video, we're going to look at the preference key. This is something that I actually didn't even know about for the first year and a half of using SwiftUI. But once you do know about it and you start building custom SwiftUI components, you will run into situations where the preference key will come in handy. And the most common example of a preference key is actually the title in the navigation bar. So in SwiftUI, if you use the regular navigation view, you probably set the title for that navigation view within the child view of that screen. And what you may or may not have realized is that when we are setting the title in a navigation view, we are actually updating the parent title from a child view. So in SwiftUI, normally data flows from parent views down to child views. And the only way we can get it to flow back is if we use a binding. But you probably noticed that when you're setting the title on a navigation view, there is no binding. We just set the title as a string and it updates the parent view. And that's because behind the scenes, it is using a preference key. And if that sounds confusing, do not worry, because we're going to start with really simple examples. We're going to recreate how to update the navigation view title just so you can see how it works. And then we're going to get into some really cool ways that we can use this in our apps.
All right, welcome back everyone. In our Xcode project, let's right-click the navigator, create a new file for this video. It'll be a SwiftUI view, and let's call this PreferenceKey Bootcamp. Go ahead and click Create. Once you're inside, click Resume, and let's get coding. And we're going to start off by creating a very simple navigation view. Open the brackets, and in the navigation view, let's put a VStack. And then in here, I'm just going to put text for now. It says hello world. On this VStack, I'm going to add a navigation title that says navigation title. And what we're going to start in this video is just looking at how this navigation title works, because this actually works unlike anything else we do in SwiftUI. So in SwiftUI, we can set things up like this, like a text where we have the value directly. But we can also set up variables like this, @state private var text of type string equals hello world. And we can pass this text down into the view here. But the key here is that this text, where it's coming from, is actually the parent level. And we're passing values from the parent level down to the child level, right? So this view is a higher level than this text. So we can take this and we can pass it in. Let's create another struct. We'll call this secondary screen of type view. Every view conforms to body. And we're just going to pass in some text. So we'll say let text of type string. And then we're going to put that on the screen. So we'll say text, and we're going to pass in the text here. So if we want to put the secondary screen on this screen, we'll initialize it with our text. Click resume. Obviously it's still going to work. And again, the key here is we're passing values from the parent level down to the child level. And if we look at this navigation title, we could even put this navigation title on maybe the secondary screen here. And this value is coming from the child level. This is a child level where we're starting. And it's actually changing the navigation title at this navigation view level, which is a parent to this child. So here the values are actually being reversed. Instead of going from the parent down to the child, we're going from the child back up to the parent. And this is unlike anything we do in SwiftUI. So how does this actually work? Well, when we set this navigation title, we're actually setting a preference key. So let's create a custom preference key here. We're going to create a struct, and I'm going to call this custom title preference key. And this is going to conform to preference key. And we'll open the brackets. Now there's two things every preference key needs. There's a default value. So if we start typing default value, we'll get this here, and it's of type value. This value here, we can change to whatever type we want this preference key to be. So being that this is going to be a custom title, it's going to be a string. So I'm going to make this a string, and I'll give it a default value of blank string. So if we don't set the custom title preference key, by default, it'll just be a blank string. And this is kind of similar to the navigation title. If we don't set this navigation title, we won't actually see a title here. It'll just be blank. So we're going to keep the default as a blank string, and then we need one more function that is reduce. So if we start typing in reduce, you'll get the completion here. And in this reduce function, we can see that we have a value which has an in-out of type string. So this in-out means we're going to get this value as a parameter, and we're also going to return out this string. So basically in this function, we have the option of updating the current value. So right now, if the default value is a blank string, this value will start as a blank string. So of course we could return the current value as is, but we don't really want to do that. What we want to do is update the value to the next value. So in this function, we'll very simply say value equals next value. And this next value is a function that returns a string. So this, we want to actually execute the function so that it returns a string. And that's all we need to do is set up this custom title preference. So now this preference key will be a global value that we can set, and it will always have some sort of string value. So if I come up here on my screen, so right now we have this text that is of type string and it says hello world. And let's make this text actually resemble the value in our new preference key. So what we do anywhere in this view here, we're just going to add a .onPreferenceChange. And we have the completion here that has a key and an action. So I'm going to click enter here. So here we can set up whatever preference key we want to watch. And of course, that's going to be our custom title preference key. And we'll call .self to refer to the actual key. And then we have an action to perform. So what happens here is we're watching this key. And when that key gets updated or changes, that new value is going to return here. So this value is going to be the same as this value in our reduce function. So whatever that new value we're getting, we're going to get it in here, and then we can do whatever we want with it. So we can set self.text equal to that updated value. So now if we change this preference key, wherever we change it in our app, if we set this key, whether it's on a parent level or a child level, we are watching it and we are going to update our text with that new value. So just to show you quickly on this secondary screen, I'm going to add a .preference, and we're going to set the key, which is the custom title preference key .self. And we're going to set it equal to, let's just do maybe new value. So here we are setting the actual key to this new value. And then this onPreferenceChange is watching the preference key. So once it is set, we get that value and then we can perform an action with it. And that's why on the screen, we're actually seeing this new value. And the key here again is this value is coming from a child level and we are passing it backwards up to the parent level. So this text is actually a higher level than where this preference is set. And just to prove that even further, I'm just going to cut this preference. I'm going to go down to our secondary screen and we can put it on down here. So this secondary screen does not have a direct reference to this text here. Instead, we are just setting up this preference key to a value, and then this other view, totally independent of that one, is just watching the preference key and then updating. All right, and before we move forward, I'm going to put this preference back up on this first screen here. And I want to create an extension for this preference. So we're going to create an extension of view, open brackets. In here, I'm going to create a func. I'm going to call it custom title. It's going to accept text of type string. It's going to return some view. And we're going to return self, which is the view that we're in, with .preference. And the key is going to be the custom title preference key.self. The value will be the text that we pass in. So of course, again, because we're in the view, we don't actually need to put self here, so I can just delete this. And now we can pass in, and now we can just call .custom title. So instead of this line of code, I can add .custom title. And here I can put in the new value. I can get rid of this line, and now this is looking much closer to our navigation title here. Let's just remove this text quickly by using an underscore for the global name. So now when we call this custom title, we can just add in text that says new value. Alright, so we're moving along here. We now know how to use a preference key, and we just did a very basic string one. So we basically mimicked the navigation title, and I think this was pretty easy to understand. But the question you might have then is, when might we actually need to use this? Because so far in my courses, we've never needed to use something like this. So really this comes in handy when we have a child that has values that the parent does not. So right now, custom title, this is just a text that we're putting in here. But what if this text maybe was actually coming from the secondary screen? So I'll delete this, I'll cut this. So for example, maybe this secondary screen has some function that maybe goes to the database and gets some data when we view this secondary screen. So there's maybe an onAppear, and we can perform an action, and we'll have a func get data from database. And in here, when we appear, we'll call get data from database. So just to simulate, we're going to just download some fake data here. We'll call it dispatch queue.main.async after. Maybe it takes now plus 2 seconds. And then we return with some new values from our database. Maybe that new value has a new name for this screen. So we can do an @state private var. Let's say new value of type string. We'll start it equal to a blank string. And in here, we'll just set self.newValue equal to new value from database. So if this is the case, we can then just set the .custom title to the new value. So if I click resume on the preview here and I click play, once this appears, it's going to take 2 seconds, and then we're going to download that fake value from the database, set up the new value, and we're passing that value from this child view here back up to the parent view. So I know this is a little confusing if you've never used these before. That's why I'm going over it a couple times. But we're taking the child value and we're passing it back up to the parent view. Alright, and if you're confused at all, I highly recommend taking a pause right now and trying to understand what we've done so far in this video, because you definitely should understand this basic version of preference keys before moving on. And the next example we're going to do is a little bit harder. So with that said, we're going to jump into the next example on one of probably the most relevant use cases for a preference key, and that is getting the geometry of a child view. And when we get into this next example, there's going to be a lot of code for that one as well. So let's actually put it in its own file. So I'm going to open up the navigator here. Let's create a group. Let's call this PreferenceKey Bootcamp. I'm going to put this first file in that folder. And let's right click, create a new file, SwiftUI view. And I'm going to call this Geometry Preference Key Bootcamp. Click create. Alright, on this screen, let's just add a very simple VStack, open the brackets, and let's put a text at the top that says hello world. Let's put a spacer to push it to the top, and then underneath it at the bottom, let's create an HStack that maybe has a frame with a height of 55, and inside, let's maybe put a rectangle. Just for example's sake, it could be anything, but let's copy this and let's put 3 rectangles in this HStack. On this hello world, I'm just going to give it a quick background of color, maybe let's do .blue, that's fine. And I want to make this hello world the exact size as maybe this rectangle in the center here. So right now we don't know the sizes of these rectangles, and these sizes of these rectangles are actually going to change based on the device. Right, if I have a bigger device, these rectangles will be bigger. If I have a smaller device, these will be smaller because it's just going 3 across on the device, whatever that width is. So obviously we could do something like the screen divided by 3 minus the space in this HStack, yada yada, but that's not what we're getting at here. Is we want to get the actual size of this rectangle. How do we get this exact size of this rectangle up for our title size. So a beginner developer would probably say, let's just create an H stack up here, very similar to what we did down here. And we can put our text in here and we can set the .frame with a max width of infinity. And I can just add 3 of these in here. And now we know these will be the exact same width as these rectangles. I can just hide 2 of them. So this one will be opacity of 0 and this one will be opacity of 0. But the problem not only is that we don't have the height of this rectangle, but also that we're drawing this extra stuff on the screen, which we might actually not want in our app, and that could cause other issues. So pressing Command Z to undo all of that. What we really want is the size of this rectangle. And if you follow my other courses, you know we can get the size by adding a geometry reader. So on this, let's do the middle rectangle, we can add a geometry reader. And we can do for geo in. And we can put the rectangle inside. So now this rectangle will have these values for the geometry. So for example, I'll just create an overlay on this rectangle, and we're just going to put some text here that says the geo.size.width, and let's make it a text here. Let's give it .foreground color white so we can see it. Alright, so we can see that this geometry reader here is producing a geometry value with 124 points for the width. That's great, but this again is going from a parent level here down to a child level. But what we really want is to take this geometry value and send it back up to the parent level so we can access it on this whole view here. So how do we do that? We do that by creating a preference key. Down here, let's create a struct. Let's call this rectangle geometry preference key of type preference key. Open the brackets. We're going to create a default value, and here we need to set a type. So we could pass in a CG float just for the width, but I actually want to track the entire size. So this size, if I hold the option button and click on it, is a CG size. So let's call this rectangle geometry size preference key. This will be of type CG size. We'll set it equal to .0 by default, and then we need our reduce function. And again, we're just going to take our current value and then return the next value. So we'll set value equal to next value. Alright, so let's take this size preference key. Let's create an extension for it. So we'll create a extension for view, and we'll create a func update rectangle geo size, and we're going to pass in a size of type CG size. So we'll return some view, open brackets, and we're going to call preference rectangle geometry size preference key dot self. The value will be the size. Alright, so now we can call this from our view. So up here on this rectangle, we're going to call dot update rectangle size. We'll pass in the geometry dot size. So I can get rid of this text overlay here. So now we have our geometry reader, we have our size, our geometry is being passed in, and we're setting up this preference key. And all we need to do now is watch that preference key. So anywhere on this view, I'm going to add a .on preference change on the rectangle geometry size preference key .self. We're going to get that new value in here. So up at the top, I'm going to create an @state private var. Let's call this rect size of type CG size. We'll set it equal to .0 for the init. And in here, we're going to set the self.rect size equal to the new value that we're getting from here. And so now that we have this rectangle size, let's set the frame of this text. We'll give it .frame. We'll do the width as the rect size.width and rect size.height. We don't need the alignment here. And let's click resume on the canvas. And we should see now that we have taken the child the values from the geometry reader at the bottom of the screen, and we have passed them backwards up to the parent view, where we can now set the size of our title exactly the same size as this rectangle at the bottom. Again, obviously here, this is not the exact use case that you would have in your app, this rectangle thing, but there will be use cases in your apps where you have a size of a child and you want to pass that backwards up to the parent. And now you know how. We can add a geometry reader, and then we can pass that geometry size backwards up to the parent level. I'm going to do one more example in this video that I think is probably the most common that I've at least used in apps. So let's keep moving forward. We're going to right click the navigator, create a new file, SwiftUI view, and let's call this scroll view offset preference key bootcamp. Scroll view offset preference key bootcamp. Click create. And I'm going to move fast here because we've already done 2 of these. So let's create a navigation view quickly. In here, I'm going to put a scroll view with a VStack. And I'm just going to put text in here. It says hello world. And underneath this, I'm going to do a for each. And let's do from 0, ... less than 100 for each index, but we don't need the index, so we'll do an underscore. And in here, we're going to add a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10. Let's give it a fill of color.red, opacity 0.3, and frame. Let's just do width of 300, height of 200. Doesn't really matter for now. On this scroll view, we'll add a .navigation title, and we'll say nav title here. If I click play on this simulator here, what I want you to notice is this nav title, as we scroll up, actually moves into a navigation bar, right? You've probably seen this many times in apps. And this is looking a little laggy, so let's actually just make it to less than maybe 30. All right, so we have our navigation title moving into the navigation bar. And the question is, how is that happening? How does that actually happen? Well, behind the scenes, this view knows how much we have scrolled off this screen. So it knows if the actual navigation title is being moved off of the screen or not. And if it is, we have this other navigation bar come onto the screen. So basically what we want to do is kind of replicate that, but with our own custom code. Because this is a very common UI effect, where as you're scrolling up, maybe you want the title to disappear, maybe you want something else to come in or come off of the screen. The underlying data that you really need is, what offset are we on this scroll view? Is it being scrolled down, or are we at the top of the scroll view? So let's set this up quickly, and we're going to create up here, let's create a let title of type string. We'll set it equal to new title here. And I'm going to get rid of our navigation view. So I'm going to take our scroll view here, I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to delete the navigation view and the nav title and just paste in our scroll view. Click resume. All right, I'm going to take our title, put it on this text. Let's give this text a .font of large title, a font weight, semi-bold, and let's give it a frame with a max width of infinity and alignment of leading. So we have our new title here, and finally on this VStack, let's just add maybe some padding. We have our new title, and then as we scroll up, we want another navigation bar to appear on top. So I'm going to create a .overlay on the entire scroll view. And on here, we're just going to add some text that says the title. Let's give this a font of headline, and we're going to give this a frame with a max width of infinity, a frame with a height of maybe 55, and we'll give it a background, and we'll just do color.blue just so we can see it. Finally, let's add an alignment to this overlay of top, so we can align it on the top of our screen. And just to clean this up real quick, let's come down here, let's create an extension for scroll view preference key bootcamp. Let's create a private var title of type title layer of type SomeView. Let's create a private var content layer of type SomeView. And let's create a private var navbar layer of type SomeView. All right, the title layer is going to be obviously our title here. Just add title layer. Content layer is going to be this little loop here. And the navbar layer will be this overlay here. We'll call it navbar layer. Click resume. Our code is looking clean. And we're not actually going to deal with this overlay just yet, so let's comment it out for a second. So what we really want on this view is to know where this new title here is in relation to the entire screen. So is it right here, or is it being pushed off of the screen? And if it's off the screen, we're going to do some animations. So we're going to start by creating our preference key. So at the top here, let's create a struct. Let's call this scroll view offset preference key. It'll conform to preference key, open brackets, default value, which will be of type CG float, set equal to 0, and then we're going to add our reduce function where we set the value equal to the next value. And all my examples so far, we've done this exact function, value equals next value, but I do want you guys to realize that you can customize the next value if you need to, and you can do that in here. Well, let's get this scroll view offset preference key onto our screen here. So at the top, I'm going to create an @state private var offset. Let's call it scroll view offset of type CG float. Set it equal to 0 to begin. And then on this scroll view, we'll add an on preference change. We'll set the scroll view offset preference key .self, and then we're going to set scroll view offset equal to the value. Click resume. I'm going to add another overlay on here that just has a text, and in this text I'm just going to put the scroll view offset just so we can see it real quickly. It's 0 right now and it's going to stay 0, but as we scroll on here we want to update this offset. And that offset is going to be based on where this new title is. So on this title layer, we're actually just going to add a .background. And it's going to be a fake background that we're not going to actually be able to see. So I'm just going to add a blank text here. And I want to put this text, and I want to get the geometry of this text. Where is this text on the screen? So what we're going to actually do is put it inside a geometry reader. Open brackets, GeoIn. Put the text on the screen, and now we want to know where is this geometry in relation to the screen. So on this text we're going to add a .preference, and we'll set the key. We'll set the scroll view offset preference key .self, and we're going to set it equal to the geo.frameIn, and so it's going to be the geometry reader within the coordinate space, which we have not customized our coordinate space. So let's just use the entire frame of the iPhone. So .global, and then we're going to call .min_y. So the min_y is the top of the title here. So now we can see that it starts 63 points from the top of the device. So we can see 63 here. And as we scroll, we can actually get the exact offset of our title here. And it's starting at 63 here because of the safe area inset at the top, as well as the padding that we have on our VStack. And then based on this scroll view offset, which we could customize more, but based on the scroll view offset, we can then add modifiers to our screen. So for example, we could animate this title layer now. So we can call .opacity, and we probably would have to customize this in our actual production app, but right now we know that it starts at 63. So we could set the opacity here to be maybe the scroll view offset divided by 63.0. And let's actually make this scroll view offset a double. So when it's 63, the opacity is going to be 63 divided by 63, so 1.0. And if we scroll up, it'll be maybe 49 divided by 63, so it'll be a little bit clearer, a little bit harder to see, and we can see it starting to fade away. And as we scroll up, we can see the title very nicely starts to fade off the screen. And you can then go and customize this as you want, but you can see how we can start to get some really cool offset effects by using this. Additionally, we want to show the overlay layer at a certain level, right? So, all right, let's put this overlay layer back on the screen here. And I only want to show this overlay layer if we are maybe moved up, let's say, to past 40 offset here. So let's just put a dot opacity on this overlay layer, and we'll just say if scroll view offset is less than 40, let's make it 1.0, otherwise 0.0. We can customize this more to actually look better for our app. But right now we're at 63, so we can't see that nav bar layer. But once we get past 40, it'll come onto the screen. We can then customize this more so that it animates onto the screen. Maybe there's like some offset from the top, and maybe it's not just from 0 to 1, maybe it's like a percentage so it fades in or something. But this video is getting long and you guys get the point here. We can use these preference keys to actually extract the scroll view values from this scroll view reader. And the final thing I want to leave you guys with, I know this is a very, very long video, is a view extension that we can use to actually just do all of this logic automatically. So down here, let's do it at the top. Let's create a extension for view. And I'm going to call this func. Let's do it on scroll view offset changed. And we're going to open close parentheses, return some view, open brackets. We're going to return self, of course, because we're in the view. And let's add a geometry reader in here. So this background, I'm going to copy and paste it here. And then let's also take the on preference change here, copy, let's paste that here. All right, and then on the preference change, we actually want to perform an action. So we don't have this scroll view offset in this modifier here, so let's delete this. And we really want to call an action that we'll have to pass in as a parameter. So we'll say action of type at escaping. Let's do an underscore, let's call this offset of type CG float. And this is going to be a function that returns open and close parentheses, also known as void. It returns nothing. I have covered this at escaping in an earlier bootcamp if you are confused, but basically with this we can then call this action from in here. So we can call action and we can pass in the value. All right, so then we can use this on scroll view offset changed directly into our view here. So instead of this background layer, we don't need this. I'm going to delete this background layer. I'm going to delete this on preference changed. So now if we click resume, it should all be gone. Nothing's happening when we scroll. And then on this title layer, I'm going to call our dot on scroll view offset changed. And we have our action. And this return value, I'll just call value. And here we'll just set self.scroll view offset equals to the value. And now all of our customization and our logic is back working in our app. Just this 3 little lines of code, which is awesome. All right, guys, there's a little bit more we can do to actually customize this and change up our preference keys, but I think that's enough for this intro video. This was way longer than I expected, but as you guys can now see, these preference keys can definitely come in handy as you really start to customize your views. So hope you learned something, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do not forget to hit the subscribe button, leave a like and comment on this video. I love when you guys comment and give me feedback. Thank you for watching. As always, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.